Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. So in my other tutorials, I frequently use Secure Shell, or SSH, to interact with Linux server instances, which can be bare metal machines, virtual machines, or LXD containers. SSH is a powerful tool used to execute commands on remote systems or to launch a command shell for a terminal session. This is a fundamental part of Linux system interaction. openssh-server is the open source tool that accepts connections from an SSH client and handles login services as well as encrypted session traffic. The preferred authentication mechanism for SSH rather than clear text passwords is based on cryptographic keys and is called public key authentication. In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to install and use both openssh-server and client on a Windows machine, and we're going to show how to generate both public and private keys in order to automate login authentication to Linux servers from Windows. Secure File Transfer Protocol, or SFTP, is part of openssh-server in addition to the SSH command and is helpful in interfacing to Linux servers. We will install WinFSP, SSHFS-Win, and SSHFS-Win Manager to provide Windows access to SFTP through Windows File Explorer. You can map a Windows drive letter with these utilities and perform drag and drop file transfers to Linux servers. We are going to install these utilities and see how this works. Here we are at our Windows 11 operating system command prompt, and I type the command SSH, and I notice that SSH is not currently installed. So I click the Start button, I type in the word optional, I click on Optional Features, and then I click on View Features, and I type in the word Open. And you can see it brings back openssh-client and openssh-server. Let's go ahead and install both of those by putting a check mark in the box and clicking Next. And finally clicking the Install button. Once both SSH server and client are installed, you can close the Apps Optional Features screen, and let's go ahead and also close the terminal screen. Next, we want to click on the Start button again, type in PowerShell. PowerShell comes up, go ahead and click on it. Let's test out our SSH client by doing an SSH over to Scott at 172.16.1.50, which is an Ubuntu server host, and you can see that it asks for my fingerprint. I say yes, and I type in my password, and it logs me in. Likewise, I can exit back out again, and the next step will be to install SSH keys, and in order to do that, we do an SSH-keygen -t RSA. It generates the key pair. Enter the file in which you want to save the key. I let it go ahead and default to ID _ RSA. I hit enter, and I'm not going to provide a passphrase, so I hit enter again, and there we have our SSH keygen completed, which means our public and private keys have now been created on our Windows machine. The next step is going to be to install WinFSP, and WinFSP is a software package that provides support for custom file systems on Windows. And it's similar to Fuse, which stands for File System in User Space, and it provides the same functionality on Linux computers. So in order to install that, we do a winget command, which is the package manager on Windows 11, and we do a winget install WinFSP .winfsp. We hit enter and it thinks for a minute. It says, do you want to install this? And we'll go ahead and say yes. And it downloads the package. We say yes, that we want to provide privilege to go ahead and install it, and it says that it is successfully installed. SSHFS-Win provides the ability to mount remote file systems via the SFTP protocol, similar to when you mount a Windows network drive. And so in order to install it, we can do a winget install sshfs-win.sshfs.win. Got to get the dashes and the dots straight there. Okay, so it's downloading the package. Again, I say yes. It installs, and it's successfully installed. So SSHFS really stands for Secure Shell File System, and it really is talking about SFTP. I don't know why in Windows they refer to SFTP as SSHFS, but basically the two terms are interchangeable. It's completely optional, but there's a package called SSHFS Win Manager, and it's a GUI front end specifically for SSHFS-Win, and it has a user-friendly and intuitive interface. For those of you that may have used something like PuTTY, it provides a PuTTY type interface to define your credentials. But I don't think that we're really going to need it because we're going to be using the SSH keys to accomplish really the same thing. But let's go ahead and install it through winget, which is winget install --id equals EVA or EVSAR3 .sshfs-win-manager -e. And of course we get an error because that command is not valid. And upon closer inspection, it appears that this is supposed to be ID equals, and I accidentally put a dash. So I hit enter. It downloads the SSH Win Manager. It's starting the package install. We should get the pop-up here shortly, and it appears that we don't. So it probably didn't have any requirement for specific privilege. Since Windows doesn't have the Linux command ssh-copy-id, a good substitute for that is type $env:/.sh/id_rsa.pub, and we pipe that over to an SSH command going to Scott at 172.16.1.50, where we cat out the key that we just got over here, the public key, into the authorized key files remotely. So as we provide our password, we've just copied our public key over into the authorized key files. As a result, we can now do an SSH Scott over to, or Scott at 172.16.1.50, and now it should recognize my public key and sign me in without the requirement for a password, and you can see that it has done exactly that. So in Windows File Manager, one of the convenient things to do is to use our SSHFS driver that we've installed, which is really part of the openssh-server on the target node but then we had to install that SSHFS over here. And really all of that is just using SFTP, simple file, or rather secure file transfer protocol. So if we right click on this PC and go down to show more options and then say map network drive, if we type in //SSHFS /Scott at 172.16.1.50 and we do a finish, it will go ahead and prompt me for the password. So I suspect that the SSHFS that we installed does not know how to look at the keys here, but we're going to look at that a little bit further. So let's type in my password on that remote Linux server, or click on OK. That's it. And then it brings up that interface. So I have a home directory over there, and I'm going to go ahead and do a right click. Well, let's see. Let's go ahead and bring up Notepad over here. And so in Notepad, we'll go ahead and type in a file and say this is a test file created on Windows. And then I'll go ahead and do a file save as, and we'll go ahead and point to drive Z if we can. And I guess it's not going to let me do that, so I'm just going to say test file and save it. Okay, so now we exit Notepad, and here is our drive Z, which is our remote system, and here is the documents directory over here, and here is test file. So we can take test file, drag it, and drop it over here. And you can see that it's doing a copy. And we can see test file remotely. If we double click it, it'll open it back up and say this is a test file on Windows. Now, if we go ahead and go into our SSH session and we do an ls over here, you can see that testfile.txt is over there. And if we cat testfile.txt, there it is. So we can do a remove of testfile.txt, delete it from the Linux side. We do an ls and it's gone. If we come back over here and we move over to the desktop and move back over here to that system, let's see, I guess the best way to do this, it would be to go to this PC and double click drive Z again. And when we open drive Z, you can see that test file is gone. So on the Linux side, we're used to using our file manager to drag and drop files to our remote systems. And this drive Z that's pointing to 172.16.1.50 is a Ubuntu 2204 server, and that particular server does not run a GUI at all, and we're used to using that with the file manager in Linux. And also one of the common things that we do is we tend to copy things from one Linux node to another, and we use drag and drop a lot of times because it's really simple. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on my PC, go down to show more options, and I'm going to map another network drive. You can pick any letter you want, but it just starts at the end. The last drive was Z. This drive will be Y. So I'll say / SSHFS /Scott at 172.16.1.51, which is another node. And I do a finish. It prompts me for my password. I type in my password and I say OK. It attempts connection and it is connected. So We now have a drive Y here, and we now have a drive D over here. So if we were to pick up our test file, we'll open another window here, and this window to File Explorer will be a local window, and so we'll go to the Documents file, and we'll pick up our test file, and we'll copy it over to drive Z like we did last time, and it copies. And now that it's copied over there, we'll drag that test file from drive Z over to drive Y, which is my other Linux node, and you can see it's over here. And this time, if I do an SSH over to 172.16.1.51, which is the other node, and I've never connected to it, so it says you want to continue connecting, and I say go ahead, accept the fingerprint. I type in the password because we don't have the command, or we did not move our public key over there, but I do an ls over here, and you can see that I have testfile.txt. If I do a nano on testfile.txt, it brings up the nano editor, and this is a test file created on Windows. So I can do a remove on testfile.txt here, and I can exit out of that system and exit out of the PowerShell, and then over here I can say go to drive Z, which is the .50 node, and if I move off to another folder, move back to the desktop, let's see, quick access. Yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can find this PC, and we'll go ahead and go to drive Z. And since we deleted test file on drive Y, it's still on drive Z. But if we go ahead and move over to another folder and then move back to this PC and move to drive Y, you can see there's no test file down here, but we can turn around and delete it from the GUI over here by clicking on the wastebasket and saying, yes, I really want to delete that file. And I can come back to my desktop, come back to this PC, and go back to drive Z. And so drive Z now also does not have a test file any longer. So this is really handy for being able to connect to Linux servers that you have to do file management on regularly, and plus the fact that you could use something like Notepad to edit those files instead of signing on to the terminal. So right now I have two SSH or SSHFS drives connected, and you can see that by going to this PC, and I can right click on them and I can say show more options and do a disconnect, and you'll see that that first drive went away. Likewise, I can do a right click, show more options, disconnect, and this drive goes away. Now another example of connecting is you can simply come up to this control line here and say / SSHFS / 172.16.1.50. Actually, I'll go ahead and put my username in there too, Scott at 172.16.1.50. I hit enter, and that will go ahead and log into that again. It'll say, what is your password? I go ahead and type in my password, and it will open up again, hopefully. There we go. And you can see that I'm signed on to 172.16.1.50. If we go back to this PC, you can see that it did assign drive Z to it. So it's kind of a shortcut instead of having to go map drive, because SSHFS always seems to map a drive in any event. So again, we can go down here and right click and say disconnect, and we're disconnected from that. And likewise, of course, you can always move over to drive Z from the command line and manipulate the files that way. But I thought it was kind of interesting that we can provide a GUI interface to our Linux files. So there are some interesting command line commands that you can also use with this. For example, the netuse command. And netuse is normally used to connect to Windows shares on the network, and you can see that I'm currently not connected to any. So if I do a netuse and I pick my favorite drive letter, let's say S for Scott, and I do / SSHFS /Scott at 172.16.1.51 and hit enter, it'll say the password's incorrect. So what is the username, or the username, and I say the username is Scott, and then it will ask me for the password. I type in the password, and then I will get a command completed successfully. And now if I do a netuse, I have drive S. If I move over to drive S and do an ls, that is in fact the folder on my Linux node. So we come back to drive C, we do another netuse, and I can say netuse s:/d to disconnect from the drive. If we do another netuse, you can see that I'm no longer connected. Now there's another command that's kind of interesting as well. You'll recall that on node 50 that I had connected that with copying the SSH key over there earlier in the demonstration. And so if I provide that one, it'll prompt me for my username here. So if I type in Scott, I type in my password, it will connect me. And if I do a netuse, there you go. So if I do a netuse s:/disconnect, it will disconnect, and now nothing is connected. But as you'll recall, since I copied the SSH key for 172.16.1.50 over to that node, we can actually do an SSH-K or .k, and then it will automatically connect, and I can do a netuse. So let's suppose we want to do a netuse and we want to go to 51 where we did not copy the key over, and we do the .k. It'll say that, whoops, we have to pick another drive letter. Let's go ahead and pick T, netuse T:, and it says the network name cannot be found. And so part of the reason for that is because we need to copy the SSH key over there in order to use the .k form of the netuse command. So if I copy my SSH public key for 172.16.1.51 over to the authorized keys on that remote Linux server using this command we used earlier, we can hit enter. It will prompt us for our password, and it says, comes back to the prompt. And now if I turn around and do the netuse on T with the .k form, it will connect automatically, and we can do netuse. We can see that drive S is connected to the Linux server at 172.16.1.50, and drive T is connected at 172.16.1.51. So although we get our SSH keys recognized in this interface from the command line, unfortunately the Windows File Manager does not recognize the command keys from it. If anybody knows how to do that, certainly provide that in the notes. The other thing is that we install was SSH Win Manager, and SSH Win Manager is an application that lets you put entries in for various systems, and then theoretically you can use their names to go ahead and connect to them. So I should be able to, here I have, if I go in and edit this particular setting, you can see that I've got 172.16.1.50. I don't know why it doesn't let me actually go in and edit it, but anyway, I provided the username and password for it. So since this is supposed to dovetail into SSHFS-win, I should be able to go up here to the command prompt and enter it without being prompted for a password, but unfortunately that doesn't work. So let's try something else here. Maybe this will work. Let's go ahead and disconnect from this one, and let's go ahead and more options and disconnect from this one, and let's see if we can get our keys recognized up here by doing a / SSHFS.k /Scott at 172.16.1.50, and if it will use my SSH key that I copied over to connect to the 1.50 node without prompting me. I hit enter, and sure enough that works. So it looks like the .k version of the command is exactly what you need in order to be able to sign in once you have a key copied over to your remote Linux system. So you'll recall that earlier in the video, one of the things that we did was to install SSH-server on Windows. Well, at this point, we want to start an administrator Windows PowerShell. And once you get in there, you can do the command get service or get-service SSHD. And if you do that, you'll notice that although the service has been installed, it's stopped. So you want to be able to say either start or stop the service. We'll say start-service on SSHD, and once we do that, if we go do a get service, you can see that it is up and running. Now if I do an IP config, I find out that my Windows machine is operating at 172.16.217. So in order to connect to it, I'm going to bring over my Ubuntu terminal that's running on my local machine, and I'm bringing it just on top of this display. So I'll do an SSH over to 172.16.1.217, and since my username of Scott matches locally and also on Windows, I should just be able to log in without having to say Scott at 172.16.1.217. So I agree to the fingerprint, I go ahead and I type in my password, and I'm logged into Windows via SSH. And if I do a directory over there, you can see that I'm looking at my default folder for the Scott account. So in summary, WinFSP provides support for custom file systems on Windows and is similar to Fuse, which is the file system in user space, which provides the same functionality on Linux computers. SSHFS-Win provides the ability to mount remote file systems via the SFTP protocol, similar to Windows network drives. SSHFS-Win Manager is a GUI front-end specifically for SSHFS-Win with a user-friendly and intuitive interface. We learned how to use public key encryption to support login and file transfer to Linux systems from Windows File Manager. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like on the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.